clips of this show up on YouTube. So yeah, if you want to check out the video or whatever, the audio is actually a little bit better as well. Putting stuff, but yeah, just go to my YouTube channel. It's Charles Lamson's webcam video, and there you'll see a bunch of clips from previous shows. So just another way to check out the show in little increments. If you don't want to put forth the investment, the whole 2 hour investment of time, you just want to check out maybe quick 10 to 15 minute segments, that's a good way to do it. Okay, so we were talking about the Masons and how they're looked upon as perhaps lower class occultists among some of the more uh, exclusive esoteric orders. Uh, and how the mysteries were passed on to these guys because it was part of their. They did good luck rituals before, during, and I guess after the building of the various temples, and these were passed on when they started wanting these guys to build their churches. And so when temple building gave place to church building, the tradition survived for a long time, and builders persisted in raising their structures due east and west. Um, and that's sort of an ancient thing. The temple always faced the east. And worked them into a mass of ancient symbolism. They worked into the churches a mass of ancient symbolism that they're yeah. I think a lot of occultists will try to tell you that yeah, and the church. Meanwhile, the church had no idea what they were doing. But I mean, we've all heard of the Jesuits, man. I mean, so yeah, anywhere you have a powerful group of people, okay, and the Vatican is no exception. I mean, the Vatican is its own sovereign nation. Uh, the people at the top who are controlling things are part of a brotherhood, like it or not. So they know exactly what the hell was going on with these churches and with the various demons that if you look at some of these old Gothic churches, cathedrals, yeah, just all the weird occult imagery that are in these cathedrals is incredible. I mean, it looks almost like you're looking at some kind of weird satanic temple, as opposed to a Church of Christ or what have you. But nothing surprises me anymore. Yeah, it's we live in bizarro land. Up is down, black is white, hot is cold. So yeah, so now that the operative Masons had any such esoteric designs is attributed to them by imaginative writers. Yeah, they basically just think they were very. A lot of people just the mainstream just thinks they're being imaginative, and it isn't any occult symbolism or anything like that. But no, these guys were all schooled in the occult. It was just as much a part of their training as building stuff was. So when the Knights Templar were trying to avoid persecution, they just sort of and decided to infiltrate the Scottish Rite of Masonry and the York Rite of Masonry. They fit in like a glove because they had discovered a lot of teachings during the Crusades when they visited holy sites in the Near East and met up with an old Syrian man. These before they were even called the Knights Templar, they were just like knights from like good families and whatnot, and from Europe's more elite families. And back then, much like today, they would send the youth off to die in wars because otherwise they'd be at home causing a bunch of trouble. So And not only that, I thought, yeah, if you were actually able to live through war, it made you more of a man and that kind of thing. But so, but back then it was the elite. It was sort of a warrior class that actually ruled. It wasn't like this weenie technocrat class we have today that rules. It was more like a badass mafia class. Guys that because the only people who were even allowed to take up swords back then and use weapons were the elite, the lords and what have you. The peasants weren't even allowed to train with weapons or even pick up a sword. So anyway, these guys go down to the Crusades and they go to Syria. And they meet this guy down there. He's an old master. Well, I guess an old wise man, whatever, and an old occultist. Let's put it that way. And his name was the Ancient of Days. And so he starts telling them all these, all the stuff about Atlantis, Atlantis, Shambhala, Agartha, and other occult teachings. And these guys get schooled and all that stuff. They come back and, I've talked about this before, but I'm digressing. So I'm just talking about how, yeah, after they had all of this esoteric knowledge and they started becoming persecuted, and they wanted to infiltrate into the hideout, if you will, in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and the York Rite of Freemasonry. They fit right in because they already had a lot of their own esoteric type rituals and ideas and whatnot. So, these old rituals that these Masons practiced, they were retained as superstitious luck bringers, after the manner of the child who prayed regularly. Um, so, yeah, they actually welcomed, I guess, in the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, they welcomed the Freemasons in there because their rituals and their actual knowledge of the occult was somewhat limited. So, in the occult, these occultists teach that there are two paths to the innermost. Once again, it's like a name for God. They have all these weird names for God, like the Great Unmanifest, the first Manifest, um, the first Swirlings, the Innermost. I think that's another. I mean, it doesn't translate directly into God, but it's very close. I guess in Buddhism they would call it the mind with a capital M. And in Buddhism, yeah, they. Well, I guess a lot gets lost in translation into English, but in Buddhism, that's translated into English anyway. They have a what's known as a mind with a small m, which is like our normal day-to-day mind that's obsessed with all the minutia, and they even have a term for this little mind, or the mind with the lowercase m. They call it the monkey mind as well, just because yeah, before we learn how to actually control our minds just basically bounce around like monkeys in a tree. I guess that's the connotation they're trying to make there. But and then they also have the mind with a capital M, and this is supposed to be more of like I guess the God within us all, or the subconscious the part of ourselves that looks on in detachment, as the monkey mind parts of us obsess over, things like Lady Gaga's latest dress and who's going to be the next judge on American Idol. The mind with the big M looks on like, what a fucking dumbass. So anyway, there are two paths to this innermost, this greater mind, this mind that gives gives us access to paranormal superpowers. This is what an occultist would say. So there's the way of the mystic, which is the way of devotion and meditation, and this is a solitary and subjective path. Uh, and then there's the way of the occultist. I mentioned that. I mentioned this. I touched on this before a little bit. The way of the mystic and the way of the occultist. The way of the occultist, according to these Western esotericists, is the way of the intellect, of concentration, and of the trained will. And upon this path, the cooperation of fellow workers is required. You can't run off to a mountaintop and whatever, and because it's not like that. And I think I brought this up before. I think one thing I read, was reading the difference between a mystic and an occultist.